Chapter 20. Now, I don't know about you, but there have been various moments in my life in which they just felt surreal. Like, is this really happening? How is my life like this? There are lots of moments in which I've thought to myself, I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be doing this. And these random and bizarre moments sometimes cause me to think about just how strange life can be, how unpredictable the journey of life really is. For example, I was once kicked out of a grocery store in a full Easter Bunny costume. And I thought, how is this a normal Tuesday for me? For other examples, I've been on a hot roof in Charleston, South Carolina in the summer, painting an awning, using an extension cord as my safety rope to keep me from falling off. I've staged a car accident to scare some kids one time. I've had my entire body painted blue. I've helped construct the world's largest whoopee cushion. I've jumped rope with kids in the jungles of Honduras, and that's the most I've ever sweated in my life. I've made 100 glowing blow dart guns. I've exploded watermelons with rubber bands. I once shot someone down a 400-foot slip and slide using a human crossbow. I've led worship and preached to a crowd of 1,000 orphans that didn't speak English. And I've even held several Easter egg hunts for dogs at a dog park. Now, I don't say any of that to brag, but rather to bring to mind for you the simple truth. Life is weird. At least mine is. And as much as we may plan and dream and prepare, we just don't really know where this life is going to take us or how God is going to use us. In fact, every single one of those bizarre things that I just mentioned to you at the beginning of the sermon were done in the context of doing ministry and being employed at a local church. They're all ministry-related things somehow. None of those things were part of my long-term plans. I would never have been able to predict that I would have been doing any of those things. And yet, by God's grace, through the weird and bizarre moments, I can say with confidence that I have seen God at work. God has been present on this bumpy and peculiar and unusual and often difficult journey. And one thing I've learned, you simply cannot predict where your faith will take you or how God will use you. But if you are serious about following Jesus, you can trust God to be at work even in the weird. Now, we've seen that to be true in various parts of Acts, and as we're going through part 2 of our study of the book of Acts, today in Acts chapter 20, we'll see even more weirdness and even more of God at work. In Acts 20, as Paul continues on his third missionary journey, and the pace of Luke's narrative picks up a bit, we will see God working in the weird. And in addition to one particularly strange story, we'll also see beautiful evidence of God's work throughout the long journey, through unlikely relationships, through strange occurrences, through unpredictable circumstances, and even when things don't go according to plan. So let's look together at Acts chapter 20. Now remember, last week we covered the riot at Ephesus and the nearly 3 years that Paul spent in that city. And as we discussed, Paul had already sent Timothy and Erastus ahead of him to go along this path to visit the churches in Achaia and Macedonia. They were supposed to go there and begin fundraising for the church in Jerusalem that was in need. Paul was planning to go and visit those churches and then take a ship over to Jerusalem. And this chapter is going to give us a very brief description of Paul taking this long journey around and then back around unexpectedly on his way to Jerusalem. So look with me at Acts chapter 20, verses 1 to 6. After the uproar ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. When he had gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. There he spent 3 months. And when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail from Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. Sopater the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, and the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus. These went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas. But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days we came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. Now, these few verses encapsulate a large part in a long period of time of Paul continuing to journey. You can see on the map here kind of how this went. If you look at the map on the screen, you'll see Ephesus kind of in the middle, and then over, maybe in just a second, there we go. Ephesus there in the middle. Everything to the west of Ephesus is what was just covered in those few verses. So Paul went all the way up through Macedonia, passing through Troas to Philippi to Thessalonica, then down through Berea, all the way back down through Athens, and all the way down to Corinth, where he spent 3 months. That's how this has gone so far. And then we find out that he had to change his plans because while at Corinth, there's a plot against him from the Jews. We kind of assume, based on other things that we know, that the Jews were planning to kill Paul on the ship that was going to take him from Corinth all the way over to Jerusalem. You can see that would be an easier way to go all the way to Syria. But there was a plot against the Jews to kill him, probably to have an assassin go on the ship with him and push him overboard somewhere at sea. Paul finds out about this, however, and then decides to go a different way back home, a land route that is completely out of the way, all the way back up through the churches that he had just visited. So he doubles back to do all of this. Now, interesting fun fact, in the 3 months that he's sitting there at Corinth as these plans are changing, that is the time in which Paul writes the letter that we know as the book of Romans. Paul had not yet been to Rome. He plans to go there. He will get there. But he wrote the letter, this great theological treatise, to the Christians in Rome long before he would ever be there at this time on this third missionary journey while he was in Corinth. Now, this passage also gives us a list of a bunch of people joining Paul on this trip going out ahead of him. He picks up Sopater in Berea. He snags Aristarchus and Secundus in Thessalonica. Luke, the author of the book of Acts, personally joins him on one of his passes through Philippi. And we know that because from here on out, we'll see Luke using the terms us and we, because he joined Paul in this portion of his journey. Timothy was also obviously with him. Gaius had come all the way from Derbe, and then the team gains Tychicus and Trophimus as well. And the whole team eventually meets back up at Troas after passing through those places twice. Now, in the midst of all those travel details and names, I want you to take just a moment to imagine just how affirming and satisfying this must have been for Paul. Paul has been gone from these people for years, and yet, as he passes back through these places, he finds good, faithful people. He finds active, engaged churches. He finds people that he had invested in a long time ago who are ready now to come alongside him and serve in ministry. In other words, the seeds that he had planted have grown and produced fruit. Now, some of you might remember, way back in November, we studied Acts chapter 16, one of Paul's other missionary journeys. And from that story in Acts 16, we drew a couple of very simple points. The first point was that the people that we meet matter. And the second point was that the places that we go matter. Those are important things for us to remember. As you go about your day, the places that you go matter. The people that you interact with, those people matter. God is doing something with those people. He's using you in those people's lives. And this story kind of circles back to that whole idea, and I think adds a second dimension that is important for us to consider. The first blank that we should understand is this: God is at work in the people, in the places that he sends us, even in our absence. That's a special little adjoinder there. Even in our absence, we should understand that God is still at work. On our journey of faith, if we are thinking and acting with the gospel in mind, we can trust God to not only be working while we are in those places and with those people, but also when we are not with them. In other words, as we walk and live in faith, regardless of where God sends us or who God puts in our paths, we are part of a process. Sometimes we are the ones planting the seeds. Sometimes we're the ones sharing the gospel for the first time. Other times, we are someone who waters the seed by encouraging someone else, pushing them forward on their path of faith, a path that we may never even know the end of. And still other times, we may be the person that reaps the harvest, that gets to see a young leader grow in their faith and grow into leadership and engage in mature gospel ministry. Even if they came to faith before us, sometimes we come alongside them in that part of the journey because God is at work all over the world, even when we're not there. Even in our absence, God is doing something, and we get to play a role in the time that we are with those people in those places. Paul speaks directly to this idea in the letter of 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 to 7. Remember, Paul wrote this letter back when he was at Ephesus, before he made this visit to Corinth. But he wrote this. He says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Now, this is a helpful passage and an encouraging idea because, in a way, it takes a little bit of pressure off of us. It shows us that we are not personally responsible for the salvation and complete process of sanctification for anybody. We just come and play our part. Now, you don't know, but at any point, your role in someone's life might be to plant that seed, to start talking about Jesus, to engage them with the gospel, sometimes with people for the very first time. If that is the role that you get to have in any particular place with any particular person, absolutely do that. Plant the seed. Go. Do it. It's good. But if you meet another believer, it is also good and right for you to ask them how involved they are in their faith, to water that seed, to ask them about their involvement in a local church, to invite them to engage in our local church, to do whatever you can to help that seed to grow. That may be the role that you play at any given time. Or, as I said, the role might be that you come across a mature believer that needs a place to serve, and you say, look, I have the perfect thing for you. Let's do this ministry together. Let's engage in this way together. That may be the step that you get to provide on this journey of faith. And in all those circumstances and situations, you have played a very small part, but it is God who has given the growth. And that's a good thing. And again, we see that here in our passage in the book of Acts. Paul planted these seeds. Others watered those seeds, and God brought the growth to these people in these places. Paul was there in the beginning, but he had been absent for years, and yet God was still working. God was bringing the growth. And now, by God's grace, Paul gets to enjoy these mature believers capable of joining him on his journey as he continues on. Look back at Acts chapter 20, verses 7 to 12. It says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. And he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, do not be alarmed, for his life is in him. And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while until daybreak, and so departed. And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted. So Paul, once he finally meets up with the other guys in Troas, has a short timetable. He's trying to get to Jerusalem quickly. And for that reason, Paul teaches for a very long time, very late into the night. And interestingly, on a quick side note, this is actually the earliest mention of Christians meeting on Sunday. We know that the Jewish Sabbath was always on Saturday. We also know that they celebrated his resurrection on Sundays, and that's why Christians began to meet for church on Sundays. And in this case, they're meeting at night, probably because the gathering together and having a meal and breaking bread was part of their gathering on a weekly basis. And here on this Sunday, Paul gets a little long-winded, making Eutychus possibly one of the most relatable people in all the Bible for us, right? We've all been there. I know you have been there. I can see you. The calm, dulcet tones of my voice, along with a comfy seat and sometimes just the right temperature, is just enough to make it more than likely that you may be drifting off to sleep every now and then. We get that. And if you've ever been a part of a long, stretching church gathering before, where the talking goes on, where the prayer goes on for a long time, perhaps even when it's midnight, you can definitely understand how Eutychus might feel in this moment. He is exhausted, it is boring, and he falls asleep. We get it, right? I understand this person. But poor Eutychus happens to be seated in the third-story window when he passes out. Now, for me, it's pretty funny to kind of imagine this disruption. They're all attentively listening to Paul teach, and somebody hears something rustle behind them, and they look around, and they raise their hand and say, Paul, I hate to interrupt you. I see you're really in a good groove here. I think that kid just fell out the window. Like, can you imagine? Like, wait, wasn't he just here a second ago? Where did he go? And they go and they find this poor crumpled body 3 stories down on the ground. This is a distressing situation. And yet God has a plan. In this weird moment, God is going to do something. So as they bring up this dead body, he is certainly dead, and in a way that mirrors Elijah raising the widow's son in 1 Kings chapter 17, as well as being somewhat similar to Peter raising Tabitha back to life, as we read back in Acts 9, Paul lays over this dead boy, and he is resurrected. Now, we understand that Luke probably included this miraculous story. Out of all the miraculous stories, he probably included this one because it is a really good way to liken Paul with Peter, to liken Paul with Elijah, to kind of bolster Paul's influence and affirm him as an apostle. But either way, God's grace is on full display, not only in their lives, not only in Paul's teaching of the word that caused the situation, but also in this miraculous event. And for that reason, it says the people were greatly comforted. And yet, we can agree that this is a seriously bizarre part of the story, right? Paul literally bored someone to death and then raised them back to life. But this story does also remind us of something else in our own lives and faith journeys. The next blank on your sheet is this: God is at work through the strange and unpredictable challenges we face. There is not one single chance that Paul or anyone else would have ever predicted that a kid was going to fall out of the window and die and be raised back to life. And yet here it is. They never saw this coming, and yet God was at work in the weird. And all of those things that I mentioned at the beginning of the service today, like I said, all of those things and many more that I probably couldn't think of have taken place within the context of doing ministry. I would not be able to predict any of the weird stuff that has happened in my life. And yet, as I seek to serve the Lord, I have seen that God is sovereign. He has a plan. So for you, when you find yourself in those bizarre moments when you're asking yourself, how did I get here? How did things end up this way? I never would have expected in my life that things would be like this. Try not to be thrown off by those things. In fact, in my experience, many times when you feel like this is the strangest situation that I've ever been in my life, those are not moments in which God has lost control, but yet moments in which God exerts his control most of all. So don't be thrown off. Don't be caught unaware. God works through the weirdest situations, so embrace that weird. Look for God to work, even and especially when surprising things happen. Now, after talking with them for the rest of the night, Paul set sail from Troas. Look back at Acts chapter 20, verses 13 to 16. It says, "But going ahead to the ship, we set sail for Assos, intending to take Paul aboard there. For so he had arranged, intending himself to go by land. And when he met us at Assos, we took him aboard and went to Mytilene. And sailing from there, we came the following day opposite Chios. The next day we touched at Samos, and the day after that we went to Miletus. For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost." So again, we get another little travel itinerary happening here. It seems by this description that Paul was maybe getting a little bit seasick and tired of being on ships. So for unexplained reasons, Paul decides to take a 21-mile journey by land while the rest of his team takes a ship and goes around the peninsula to meet him on the other side. And then they bounce around kind of from island to island, usually one day at a time, bouncing from port to port until eventually they arrive at Miletus, which is just south of Ephesus, as you can see again on the map on the screen, because all this travel stuff gets a little bit confusing sometimes. It's better for us to see it. On that map, you can see that he arrives at this place called Miletus, just south of Ephesus. And again, this is a really roundabout way for Paul to get to Jerusalem. It would have been far easier for him to leave Corinth on a boat and take several days to sail straight across to where he wanted to go. But like we read, a plot against him to kill him back at Corinth made him change his plans. And then for some reason, as he was at Troas, he changed his plans again and decided to go by land while his team went by sea. And all of this basically reminds us that things don't always go according to plan. We look at that missionary journey on that map, and it looks like a mess of a trip, a total result of poor planning, it seems like. But God was leading him by his Spirit through all of this. It was not the way that Paul had planned or intended things to go, and yet here he was. And that's a pretty good reminder for us as well. The next blank on your sheet is that God is at work when things do not go according to our plan. When it's not the way that we expected, when it's not the way that we thought things would work out, that doesn't mean that God is not still working and active. In fact, it might mean that your plan was bad. God's plans are better. Right now, today, you may not be where you thought you would be by now. You may not be at the point in life or in the career or with the friend group or with the family situation that you would have expected when somebody asked you when you were 18. Or when you were 25, or when you were 40, you may not be where you thought you would be. But that's okay. Your plans may fail. God's plans do not. So seek him wherever you are, even if the journey is much different than you imagined that it would be. Now, as we continue through the rest of Acts chapter 20, we're going to see Paul have a meeting with some of the elders from Ephesus as they come down to say farewell to him. And basically, he gives this long farewell address. And I don't mean to just skip through it, but I think that it is fairly important for us to read what he said, but also I think that there are things in it that we can kind of take away as he reflects on the journey that he has been on and the people that he's met and the places where God has sent him, things that he says that give us principles for us to go by in the way that we live as we go about our life journey. As weird and strange things happen, what are some guiding principles for our life journey? So we're going to fly through some of the things that he says in this passage and draw a couple of things out of it for us. Look at verses 17 to 23. It says, "Now from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church to come to him. And when they came to him, he said to them, 'You yourselves know how I have lived among you the whole time from the first day that I set foot in Asia, serving the Lord with all humility and with tears and with trials that happened to me through the plots of the Jews. How I did not shrink from declaring to you anything that was profitable, in teaching you in public and from house to house, testifying both to Jews and to Greeks of repentance toward God and of faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. And now behold, I'm going down to Jerusalem, constrained by the Spirit, not knowing what will happen to me there, except that the Holy Spirit testifies to me in every city that imprisonment and afflictions await me.'" So as I said, Paul had asked for the elders to come down from Ephesus. He didn't really have time. He knew that if he went up into Ephesus, that he would be drawn to spend too much time there and not get to Jerusalem by the time that he wanted. So he asked them to come by and say goodbye to him. By the Holy Spirit, it has been revealed to Paul that he will not see these people again. This part of their journey together is over. This is goodbye. And as he begins his farewell to these dear friends, Paul basically says, remember all that we've been through together. Think back on all that we have endured and done. Paul mentions tears and trials, all due to the fact that he was serving the Lord. All of it was about what he came to proclaim, repentance and faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Everything they had been through and all they had seen Paul go through was all about the gospel. So our first simple takeaway, our first principle as we walk this long and weird journey of life is that we should make your journey about the gospel. Make your journey be about the gospel. Make it be the guiding principle for how you live and the choices that you make. The places you go, the people you meet, the strange things that happen, the plans that work and the plans that don't. Make every effort to make them about the gospel, being aware of God's work in all those things. Do everything in your power to see all things as a gospel opportunity. Make your journey about the gospel. Paul continues his farewell saying this in verses 24 to 25. He says, "But I do not account my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course in the ministry that I received from the Lord Jesus, to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. And now, behold, I know that none of you among whom I have gone about proclaiming the kingdom will see my face again." This passage, as you'll notice, echoes a little bit of the passage that we opened our service with today in Philippians, where Paul said that everything he had gained, he counted as loss for the sake of knowing Jesus Christ as his Lord. Paul doesn't account of his life as having any value. He humbly offers it up in order to obey Jesus and to testify to the gospel of grace. So a simple takeaway that's hard for us to apply, but simple nonetheless, is that you should put your life in his hands. It is a bold thing to say that I consider my life as having little or no value, except for what it means for the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is a hard thing for us to put our entire lives in the hands of God. We are people who love to feel safe, who love to feel in control, who really even love sometimes the feeling of accomplishment, or that we have self-made. But maybe the more valuable thing is to say, you know what, I don't put that much value on my own life. I want to value the gospel in Jesus Christ more. Our lives are his. So yes, what he is calling you to sometimes may be risky or scary or dangerous or unsafe. So what? Follow after Jesus and trust him to be at work in your journey. Paul goes on to say this in verses 26 to 28. He says, "Therefore I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all, for I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole counsel of God. Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood." So here Paul reminds these elders of a couple of important foundational things. First of all, he tells them that he was not shy about teaching the whole counsel of God. This means that he taught them the entirety of the Old Testament as a way to show them the goodness of Jesus Christ. He wasn't skipping passages. And then he reminds these elders to pay careful attention to themselves and to the flock. This is really just Paul's way of encouraging them to preserve the health of the church. The church needed healthy leaders that would lead people into health in Christ. So in short, our takeaway for our journey is, as we go about this weird journey of life, no matter where it takes you, devote yourself to his word and his church. As we walk this strange journey together, no matter where it takes us, we need to cling to the word of God, the whole counsel of Scripture. All of you know and are here because we are a church that does not skip passages of the Bible. We're not leaving anything out. You are here because you understand the value of knowing the whole counsel of God. We're not cherry-picking verses and leaving out portions. No, we trust in the whole counsel of Scripture. And secondly, we cling to this local body of believers, seeking to be healthy and to make the whole body healthy and strong. We need each other on this journey. Paul continues his farewell saying this in verses 29 to 32. He says, "I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away the disciples after them. Therefore, be alert, remembering that for 3 years I did not cease night or day to admonish every one of you with tears. And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. These Ephesians to whom Paul is speaking, they know this all too well. It wasn't all that long ago that a riot rose up against them in Ephesus. So the simple message from Paul on this journey for us is this: be alert. Not only is God at work all around us when we're there and when we are absent, but also we understand Satan is also at work. There will arise sometimes evil people seeking to draw people away. There is a force that desires for people not to understand the truth, not to turn to the gospel. We have an adversary. We understand this. So we should, as we go about this journey of life, no matter where it takes you or what circumstances you find yourself in, be alert. You have an enemy that's seeking to make you fail in fear and doubt and suffer. So be on your guard. Paul goes on to say this lastly in verses 33 to 35. He says, I coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my necessities and to those who were with me. In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, as we know, Paul was a hard worker. We mentioned before how he usually supported himself in these places by making tents, and he expected others to work also for their own good and for the good of the body of the church. So the message is simple for us. As we go about our journey in life, we are not called to be lazy. We're not called to just float along this river of faith. No, we are called to work hard. The last takeaway from his address is that. Work hard. Make something of yourself. Do something with your life. Find meaning in work. Paul says this in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. God deserves our best. He deserves our hard work and enables us to give more generously to the mission of the church by doing so, which is more blessed than it is to just receive from the church. Now, very quick little side note here. Those red letters that you see in your Bible as Jesus speaks, it is better to give than it is to receive. We don't see those words from Jesus recorded anywhere in the Gospels, at least not specifically. So this is either understood to be Jesus speaking, having spoken directly to Paul, or something that Jesus said elsewhere that's not recorded in our Gospels. But either way, we know that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Now, having expressed this heartfelt farewell, this is how the chapter ends. Look at Acts chapter 20, verses 36 to 38. It says, and when he had said these things, he knelt down and he prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of all. They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful, most of all, because of the word he had spoken, that they would not see his face again. And they accompanied him to the ship. So in this farewell time, as they reflect on the time that they had had together, praying with these dear friends, there is a lot of emotion. They know now that they will not see Paul again. Their time together is over, at least their time together on this earth. And looking back on all of it, there's joy paired with sorrow and thus much weeping. Not one of them, if you had asked them years ago before they met Paul, none of them would have ever guessed that their life would be like this. They never experienced a tearful goodbye like this before, especially in this kind of circumstance. And looking back on all of it, they know for sure life is strange. It has put them in a place that nobody would have expected, and yet God has been at work on this journey. This journey that we live in life is long. Sometimes it's pretty weird. You never know where you might end up, especially if you choose to serve the Lord with your life. But for those who seek after the Lord, who make their journey about the gospel, who put their lives in the hands of Jesus, who devote themselves to his word and his church, staying alert and working hard, for those who do that, it is a weird and wonderful journey. You never know who you might meet, where you might go, or what strange and bizarre situations you might find yourself in. But you can know that the one true God is working in all these things. So take heart and know that God is at work in the weirdness of your life. Let's pray as we close for today. God, we are thankful mostly that you are the sure and steady anchor for us. I think we can all agree that for every person in this room, things have not always gone the way we thought they were. There are situations and circumstances in our lives that feel bizarre and strange and some stuff that we never would have predicted. But God, we pray that you'll show yourself to have been faithful in all those things. God, regardless of what it is that we're going through or how distracted we may feel by the strangeness of life, we pray that you and your word will shine through, that we'll see your purposes laid out clearly before us, and that we'll have the courage to walk in those things. So God, help us to be people who follow hard after you in all of life's journey, in all of life's circumstances. In your name we pray, amen. So as we continue this morning, we'll be singing Before the Throne of God Above, and as we sing